As you can see, my name's David Thomas. I'm the Chief Exec of the Middle Lower Commissioners, also clerk to 29 internal drainage boards. I've been involved in the world of internal drainage boards for around about 26 years now, so I do know something about them. My background is as a civil engineer, and that was the role that I sort of carry out now, as well as the Chief Executive role. So the aim today is really just to, I'm sure some of you will know about the work of the internal drainage boards, but for those of you who don't, just to explain what they do, why they do it, and also perhaps for those that do know something about internal drainage boards, I hope that you'll go away learning something new about them. So internal drainage boards history goes back many centuries. The oldest internal drainage board, I believe that history can be traced back to the 1200s. Now, internal drainage boards existed and operated before the police force, before the Environment Agency, before river authorities, before water authorities, and it was because it was recognised at that time that there were areas of land that needed active intervention to control flood risk. Agriculture was key, so to protect that agricultural land, these internal drainage boards were set up, and at that time many of them would have had their own legislation, they would have had their own armoury, they might even have jails, interfering with the operation of a watercourse system. Could have major consequences, because obviously that could lead to flooding and loss of crops at the time. Don't think they were too bothered at that time about whether or not people's houses flooded. Things have changed somewhat since then. So here's a picture of the current existence of internal drainage boards around the country, and you'll see that coincide with the low-lying land. Obviously you've got Somerset down there, you've got parts of Kent, which is very flat, and then you've got the Cambridgeshire Fens and Lincolnshire, and that's where the largest congregation of drainage boards exist in the country. And this little picture here really shows you, what a traditional drainage board is about. It's about, flat lands where that active intervention is really required. Currently 112 internal drainage boards. Some have been lost over time, with the advent of the Environment Agency. Others have amalgamated to become bigger boards, so lots of small boards have got together and become one big board. Cover 1.2 million acres, which is about 10% of land in England. There were internal drainage boards in Wales as well, but they were absorbed by Natural Resources Wales. We're a risk management authority. We have powers that were granted to us under the 1991 Land Drainage Act. Most of the powers are permissive. They're not defined. The standard of protection that we provide through the works we do is not defined anywhere. We do have duties, but they're generally to the environment. They came in the 1991 Land Drainage Act, and also subsequent acts have added to our duties to the environment. So that was mentioned earlier. Actually, having net gain, that is coming up the agenda and being pushed very hard, and we have to be mindful of that in everything that we do. So we're often looking for win-wins. We want to reduce flood risk, and every time we intervene, we also want to enhance the environment. Floods and Water Management Act changed the landscape by introducing the lead local flood authorities, and obviously we need to work in partnership and do work in partnership with them. One of the big changes that happened with that act was consenting. So within an internal drainage board under the 1991 Act, if you're going to interfere with a watercourse by installing a weir or a dam or a culvert to control the flow or to cross over the watercourse, traditionally you'd have come to the internal drainage board inside its district and the environment agency outside of its district. Now, outside of an IDB district, it's the lead local flood authority who grants consent. So that was quite a big change that came, and that brought the county councils and the unitary authorities sort of more in touch with the watercourse and flood risk system. Okay, so I mean we have powers, we can carry out maintenance, improvements, capital works. We've got the right to go onto land to carry out that maintenance works, and that's very important. And under our bylaws, we have control over an area of land. Generally, it's 9 metres from bank top or the rearward toe of a raised embankment, and anything within that zone which is not an agricultural activity, a normal agricultural activity, has to be consented under our bylaws, and that's important because we need access to carry out maintenance works, we need access to carry out repair works and improvement works. So we do get involved in the planning system. We're not a statutory consultee, but we do have an interest in that bylaw area. Our funding comes from direct rating agricultural land, and within the middle level area, it's the only place in the country where you have a 2-tier internal drainage board system, where you have your local internal drainage board and the middle level sitting on top of it. So you're very lucky as an agricultural ratepayer, you get two drainage bills, whereas in other areas around the country you'd only get one. We get special levy payments from district and borough councils, and the reason for that is our districts extend into urban areas, and rather than sending individual rate demands to every householder, effectively that's collectively gathered up, and that single rate demand is sent to the borough or district council. And then finally we get Highland Water contributions from the Environment Agency. Just as we charge agricultural land rates, so do the Environment Agency, but there is a recognition that the Highland Water flows down into an IDB district, so part of its catchment, maybe Highland, that flows down, and we have to deal with that water, which is why we get this Highland Water contribution. And that's in the form of a contribution towards our maintenance works. So if we had, say, 20% of our district being Highland, then 20% of our annual routine maintenance funding would be paid for by the Environment Agency through that Highland Water contribution. We get some contributions from development. If our system is capable of taking additional water, we might allow a developer to discharge into our system. That money gets ring-fenced, and then it funds improvements that we might carry out further down the line, which is to the benefit of all. And then finally, we do work for the Environment Agency, so we assist them because we have local teams of people, we have access to local contractors and very good working knowledge. A few years ago we set up these public sector cooperation agreements, and that allows the Environment Agency effectively to employ us to deliver some works for them. So for example, in Swavesey, those of you that you might live there, you might have seen some annual works, and that's ramped up in the last 2 or 3 years, and that's a result of this, where effectively the Environment Agency are gaining advantage because we are a local operator, we can deliver those works at a lower cost and probably to an equal or higher standard. I like this image because I think what I was talking about, the existence of IDBs and why they are where they are. I think this map shows that really well. We've got your flood zone, we've got the agricultural land, and the final one is peatland, which is just out of interest. But you see there's a very, very close match. That really valuable farmland is often at the bottom of the hill on the flat lands. Most of most of the middle level area, 95% of it I think is grade 1 or grade 2 agricultural land, and it hits above its weight in terms of food production. East Anglia has something like 7% of the UK's farmland, but produces 30% of our salad crops. It also is twice as productive as any other land in the UK. So this is why in this area a lot of the economy is centred around agriculture. And that's why perhaps in this area, unlike the Somerset levels, actually, there is a value in protecting that agricultural land as well as protecting properties. And that's something that's been missed for many decades in the cost-benefit sort of calculations for spending money to protect against flooding. Actually now there's a recognition that there is value in a business, because business is not only agriculture, but there's a lot of associated businesses. There's transporting the crops, there's processing the crops, so there's a whole economy that is reliant on that. If we lost the agriculture, we'd lose the beating heart of the fenlands. So this is sort of drilling down to our local area here. So these are the internal drainage boards in the Cambridgeshire area. So you've got Ramsey, Huntingdon, Sawtry, and our offices are somewhere over here in March, and then you've got Kings Lynn up here. This area here is our highland. So water runs down the hill. We're currently standing on top of the hill. When you get down to here, by the village of Home, you are getting down to -4 metres below sea level. This is the lowest land in the country, which is right on our doorstep. And if you think about it, when you're driving from Peterborough, which is not that high, you drive down a big hill and you're coming down into a valley. As a consequence, the whole of this area is reliant on pumping. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a second. I love this one as well, because this shows the network of managed watercourses in the area. So, where you might see, a river system and a few tributaries in the uplands, here, every one of those watercourse systems is managed and effectively, and that sort of, I think, brings into start sort of focus the importance of active management within the fens. And obviously, if you're interested in the history, you've got these are the two washes. So effectively, the whole of this area was drained in the 1600s. And everything was moved, rivers were moved, new rivers were created, and the idea was effectively get water away from on this flat land as effectively and efficiently as you possibly could, put in sluice gates to stop the tide coming back in again, but recognising the fact you could have a rainfall event and the tide in. What do you do with the extra water? Well, you put it into these sacrificial areas of land and you force them to flood. And that protects the agricultural land from flooding. And obviously now we've got triple SIs, Ramsar sites and conservation interest, all of which is protected by the flood defences. Did mention, I won't hover too long on this, but this is that figure that supports the idea that the fens are important for generating and lives and livelihoods. This is just a typical example of an internal drainage board. The red lines would identify the managed watercourses, and the red dots pumping stations. So the Land Drainage Act was written about what we used to call flood defence. We call it flood risk management these days, to manage expectations, because we can't ultimately defend people against any flood risk. It's about using the money you've got to optimise the management. So effectively, whether it's a 1 in 100, a 1 in 1,000, a 1 in 10, what is an acceptable level of risk, and how are we going to manage that with the resources we've got. Things have changed, and particularly over the last few decades, internal drainage boards have got more and more involved in the other side of water, which is as a resource which is used for agriculture, for potable water supply, and the two sides of the same equation. We've just had a very dry summer, so it might not be a big surprise to you that we spent the whole of the summer worrying about the lack of water and not the excess of it. So internal drainage boards now are about maintaining their system. They're about managing and controlling water. They're about improving, and they're about conservation. This is my patch. So this is the middle level area. So we've got, again, Peterborough, Ramsey here, Huntingdon, Wisbech. Okay, so the pink land is pumped once before it gets out to sea. None of the land is not pumped. So everything that is coloured there is pumped. Nothing gets out by gravity. This sort of orangey land is pumped twice. So it's lifted once, it's lifted again to get out to sea. And if you're lucky and live in this area or this area, your land is pumped 3 times. It's pumped by one of these red dots here into one of these watercourses. It's lifted again at Bevil's Lean pumping station, and then it works its way out all the way down here to this pumping station and is pumped out again. Okay. One of the strange oddities about a managed system is if you get it right, the flood risk is no worse and can be better than in other parts of the country, through that constant and active management rather than neglect, flood risk is controlled. I was in the upper reaches of the Ouse in Easter 98, so which is a gravity set of boards, so I know what it's like to experience at the sharp end of flooding on the ground in an upland board. I was also here, obviously, and I had my Christmas, like many other people did, ruined in the middle of COVID by the 2020 event. As a manager of a system, I was faced with these watercourses, network of watercourses, being very full and close to the point of being at risk of breaching. And I gave an instruction for all of these, and there are 78 little red dots, which are pumping stations, to cease pumping overnight on 2 occasions during that event, unless properties were at flood risk. So at this point, I'm effectively making the decision to sacrifice agricultural land to save properties. In a gravity system, you don't have those sort of options. So, playing tunes on your system, but it's a difficult call to make and challenging. So this is our St Germans pumping station. It is the biggest pumping station, land drainage pumping station in the UK. It cost £40 million to build. We finished it in 2010, and it replaced a pumping station that had been there since 1930. Just to give you an idea, there's a truck, there's a portaloo, and a person would be about this tall. So I hope it gives you a scale of the size of the station. It's the most technologically advanced pumping station in the UK. It's got internal fibre optic network. There's 28 kilometres of cabling. It takes account of water levels locally and 30 miles away, and it calculates when it should pump, when it doesn't need to pump. It will calculate tidal range, so it's very efficient. So it will normally choose to pump at night because electricity is cheaper at night, but if it's a low tide during the day, it will pump during the day because we only need to use a quarter of the electricity to pump at a low tide as opposed to a high tide. So what's the point of waiting till the night and then using 4 times as much electricity, even if it's half the price. It doesn't make sense. So the whole station is automated, and it does all these calculations. We can monitor it from the offices. We can check everything's going okay. But in the last event and the 2012-13 event, this station effectively was unoccupied during the entirety of the two events. We were monitoring remotely. We do get alarms. There are thousands of points of information that come from the station and can be monitored, which is okay. Just a few facts and figures. In that 2020/21 Christmas event, it was not an exceptional year, but it was a wet autumn, so the land was saturated. Then we had a couple of inches of rainfall, and in December we pumped the equivalent of Grapham out of that pumping station, and we did the same in January. So imagine the quantity, twice the quantity of Grapham Lake was emptied by this pumping station during that event. The capacity of the pumping station, peak capacity against a favourable tide, 120 tonnes of water per second. Okay, so I don't know, I often talk about Olympic-sized swimming pool, emptied 15 seconds. 4 a minute. Or a truck. What's a truck? Weigh 2 tonnes. So we're lifting the weight of 60 trucks a second. Okay, so I'm hoping I'm developing a picture of just what we're up to. This is half the story. We had a picture of a plug hole. Unfortunately, we don't have a plug hole in the Fens, so we do have to rely on the pumping station. I often describe the Fens, although slightly in those terms. It's a big bath, and we have a plug hole pumping station, but we can only get a certain amount of water out of that plug hole. And if the taps are turned on too high, the bath is filling up. So we need the bath, and the bath is our 120 miles of watercourse system and those raised embankments. We require that to fill up, basically to push the water down, because effectively a pumping station just creates a hole, and the water has to run by gravity to fill that hole. So we're just embarking on a £23 million scheme to raise banks throughout our system. So if you do drive around and you see dragline excavators moving earth out, and later on you'll see moving lorries coming in and banks going up, we are effectively bringing our system up to standard. So £40 million on that, £23 million on bank raising and other investments. All of those 78 pumping stations require ongoing investment. The good news is the high value of that agricultural land and the sort of 16 to 18,000 houses that benefit from this mean that our cost benefit ratios when we're looking for grant are exceptional. We're talking about for every pound we spend, we probably get 30 to 31 pounds back in benefits. So we do have to go through all the hoops to make it work. But at the moment, based on the arrangements that are in place for flood risk management and the calculations, we're getting 100% grant for that scheme. We still have to deliver it though, and we still have to deliver it in the cycle. Sorry?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Are they being built up through dredging?
It's 3 ways. Dredging is the favourite because it's the cheapest. Where we can't win enough material from dredging or it's not available, then importation of material. And then there's recognition in other places where we just don't have the room to create a raised embankment or raise the existing embankment any further. So we're looking at hard defences, which could be concrete walls or piling. But of course that is the most expensive of the options. So I just wanted to touch on this because often we do just talk about flood risk management and we do forget about the flip side. So we have 2 operations. April, we're all about conserving water. We turn the pumping stations off because we can, and effectively we We take water off the River Nene and we bring it into our system, then we backfeed it so that it can be taken up for irrigation purposes by the farming community. And the thing about the fens is it becomes a big sponge. So currently, after the dry summer, our soil moisture deficit is around about, currently probably 130, 140 millimetres. So we could get probably over a 24-hour period, we'd probably get 3 inches of rain, and it wouldn't, in our system, have much of an impact. Certainly less of an impact than an inch of rain in the middle of the winter, and that's because that sponge effect. As we go through the summer, and we're effectively trying to manage, and this summer, it was dry. We had one week of ban on abstraction of water for growing crops. In previous years, when we had a very dry spring running into a dryish summer, it was even worse. We had a 3-week ban on any abstraction. We've had fortnightly operation of abstraction. So it's really challenging to manage water. So we're doing that, and we're moving water around through our system. Then come this time of year, end of September, October, what we're doing is we're flipping and we're managing water purely for flood risk management. We are trying to make sure everything is operating as well as it possibly can. We tend to take our system levels down by around about 9 inches to a foot. Our problem is we can't go any further than that because we're in navigation, and boats won't be able to get through our locks if we go too low, and we can't take water levels up too high during the summer months because we've got lots of low bridges and the boats can't get under the bridges. So we do have an operating winter, summer level, and in summer we're trying to achieve then, and as water is being taken off for irrigation, it goes down, and when it goes down below our winter level, that's when all abstraction ceases, because we have to protect navigation and the rights of navigation, because that's a statutory duty. Yeah, we have a texting service which allows us to control how much water is being taken off our system, and obviously we also try to keep flows for environmental reasons, because we don't want the DO, dissolved oxygen, to go below a certain level. This I also like as a graph, because we often talk about return periods and we often talk about probability. What I do know is no 2 years are the same. And for us, we can have the same rainfall in a year. We can have 500 to 600 millimetres back to back, and we can pump 10 times less in 1 year as opposed to another. And that's because it's more important to us when the rainfall arrives. If we get a wet summer and a dry winter, yippee, brilliant. We don't have to worry about any abstraction bans. We don't have to worry much about flood risk. If it's the other way round, we're stressed over the summer and we're stressed over the winter. And if you look here, these are month by month pumping amounts at St Germans. And not surprisingly, summer months, generally dry, but you do get, the occasional wet month where we do have to pump. But look what happens at the winter. Here's 1 year. Okay, so we're pumping, so this is 50 billion litres. Okay, but look at this, less than 10. So again, makes it very difficult to calculate how much we should set aside for our electricity bill. But also, we're always working and planning for extremes. The average, that can take care of itself. We need, and this is, what you're talking about, concentrate on the extremes. Don't worry about normal. What's going to happen on a very dry year? What's going to happen on a very wet year? And if you get those right, everything else will take care of itself. That's my lot. I hope not too far over time.